Now we turn to our discussion segment, Military Coups, analysis on the future of democracy in Africa. What do recent events in Benin, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Guinea-Bissau mean for African democracies? How do these coups affect governance, citizen trust, and regional stability? And what can be done to strengthen democracy and prevent military interventions in politics? Now, joining us in the studio is Professor Nuhu Abubakar Atta, FSCA, one of Africa's brightest young minds in international affairs and diplomacy, and an expert in peace and conflict management. Has received a global recognition, including a double professorship laureate from Freedom University, USA, and at 32 was honored as an ambassador of the Commonwealth by the Commonwealth Youth Assembly under Queen Elizabeth II. Now, Professor Atta brings a strategic perspective on the threats to African democracies and will help us analyze what these recent coups mean for the continent's future. Professor, thank you for joining us this morning. Such an impressive profile.
Thank you, Maimuna.
All right, let's jump right in. Now,
fantastic.
You're welcome. Now, when you look at the recent wave of, the military takeovers across Africa, what do you think they say about the current state of democracy on the continent? Because it is really alarming.
You know, Maimuna, I was, just as we were discussing off camera, I was, outside there listening to the reactions of people, and it's so devastating to see the state that Africa is at the moment. And these issues keep happening. These concerns keep happening across the continent. The issues of bad governance, the issue of strangulated economy, so these are issues, corruption and so on and so forth. These are concerns across, Africa. And these concerns, has brought in a situation where we have to advance these conversations to the next level. Absolutely. Leaders have to now listen, and avoid some certain occurrences within borders of some countries, And, the reason why I'm saying that these conversations need to be advanced is because, people are reacting based on emotions, because of frustrations and so on and so forth, based on the situations within their countries. Now, we really have to ask questions and really have to interrogate what the problems really are, And if you really look at it, for coups to happen, from 2020 to 2025, you have over 15 coups, 8 to 9 successful. Some are not, thank God the one that just happened recently in Benin was, quelled. It simply means that something is going on. The level of poverty has increased, and the level of frustration has increased. Now Africa has the largest youth population, in the world. With a median age of 18 to 19. And then, 60% of the entire continent's population is just, 60%, below 25. So you could imagine there are no jobs, there are no infrastructures, it's as if the entire systems are being strangulated. So what is the problem? Now, if you really look at it, quite all right. We've been analyzing this internationally. We've been discussing with experts and trying to find out what really this problem is. Because if you really look at it, even the countries that have been taken over by military rule have not still sought out the problems. Do you get? Now, if you look at Mali, Mali is still overrun by terrorists. This popular president, Ibrahim Traore, his country is 60% run by terrorists up to now. If you look at Guinea, the same thing. So what is the problem? Why is it that, so is the solution military rule? So it's not about whether it's military rule or whether it's democratic rule, no. The problem is that there's a defect, there's a psychological defect in our leadership culture. That's the big problem. There's a psychological defect, and I will explain to you why we have discovered there's a psychological defect in our leadership culture. Okay. And this psychological defect stems from the outcomes of colonial rules. in Africa. You know, when a people, let me give you an example. When a people have been held captive for 100 years and 150 years, colonial rule have ruled in Africa countries for over 100 years, you know, 150 years and so on and so forth. When people are captured, they are not allowed to have access to proper education. They are not allowed to have access to economic activities. You know, their whole psychology is being damaged. And then, clamor of independence came. And then the whites took this power and just handed over to the blacks without proper training, without proper access to proper education, without proper access to how things really work, how economics work. So you hand over powers to these people. The first thing that will come to the mind of anyone who has been oppressed for 100 years or 150 years is survival. Survival instinct. First. So what do? The first thing they do, that survival instinct, is to see how we can consolidate on power and accumulate to see how we would not fall back on the colonial masters again. Maybe they will come back to colonize us again. So that's the thought. So the thought is that they would want to accumulate, they will have to see how to consolidate power. And the only system of governance that those set of leaders were exposed to over the years is dominance. Because that's the system that the colonial masters were using on us. So they emulated those systems. That is the only system they learned. They learned to dominate others, not to work with others. We don't have proper education to understand how things work. So that instinct of survival is what has happened throughout leadership in Africa. So anybody who contests elections or anybody who comes to power in Africa, look at people like Robert Mugabe. He is the most educated African that has ever lived. But how is Zimbabwe? Look at Paul Biya. He took over power as well. Where's Cameroon today? So you see, all these revolutionaries also took power. Just as we're thinking, you know, military should take power or whatever. But when you enter, because of that psychological defect that we have on our leadership culture that needs to be addressed, those revolutionaries still become dictators. And then the countries go back again in the stage of poverty and so on and so forth. So we need to address this basic defect in our psychological, psychological defect in our leadership.
So it's like
culture.
Having a faulty foundation when you're erecting a structure.
Yes, so that
definitely affects.
Yes, so that is the major issue. Is a major defect that needs to be addressed. Because if we don't address this particular defect, we'll still have the same cycle of people. Let me give you an example. We have young people in Nigeria who were given positions of authority, who contested elections and won. We say the next generation is going to be better. How have they performed? How have they performed? We have Kogi State. The youngest governor then was Yahya Bello. How was his performance? In leadership. He's moving around the FCC, running up and down, and so on and so forth. The opportunity. So we have this opportunity. The issue is that these defects are there, and we need to address them. How do we affect psychological defects on our leadership culture? And you know, this psychological defect on our leadership culture is the foundation upon which our value system is built on leadership.
Absolutely.
You know, so people don't think value. People don't think value. People think instinct of survival. So they just want to acquire and acquire and acquire and acquire. So that is just it. That is the instinct, and that must be corrected. And if we must correct this, we have to correct it through our educational system. The course, I remember Sanusi Lamido Sanusi was having a conversation, I think, on one of these issues, and he was talking of civic education that was being taught previously, where you are taught about patriotism, you are taught about character, you are taught about discipline. You know, these value systems are eroded completely. Where parents who pay bribe for their students to their children to pass exams. These are value systems. When that child grows up and and finds himself in leadership position, what happens?
They will definitely want to
begin. Yes, those are the foundational problems. So we need to address that psychological defect in our leadership culture. If we don't address that issue, it becomes a very big problem for our country. So it's a leadership challenge. Whether it is military rule, whether it is civilian rule, that's what I'm trying to make you understand. Because when we interrogate the system properly, you discover that that is the basic problem. It's a defect. So we have to address that issue. If we're able to address that issue, then we start seeing the gains. You know, we don't have value systems of meritocracy anymore. We have to build that value system, ensure that meritocracy is what matters, is what is the criteria for leadership recruitment or selections in Nigeria.
So, Professor, with all of these issues and, you know, you being an expert, in your view, would you say that the democracy in Africa is getting weaker by the day?
Yes, the democracy in Africa is getting weaker because the dividends of democracy across Africa are not being attained. We have all the development index, you know, in Africa that is all poor is in Africa. Poor development index in Africa. You know, the population, we're increasing in population, you know, in size, but our economy, our GDP is slow. Our population increase is 2.5 to 3.2%. While our economic growth, our GDP is 1.4% annually. That is a huge gap. We can't continue like this.
All right, so let's look at the recent coup that happened over the weekend with Benin. I mean, in the case of Benin, the coup plotters cited neglect of frontline troops and poor governance. And if you also look at, you know, other African countries whereby the military came up to take power, it's always a complaint of, you know, the present leaders not doing the right thing, for the people not enjoying the dividends of democracy, and for them coming in to, you know, save the country and do things rightly. So how common are such grievances across the continent? Because we see these things, you know, coming up each and every time. And when there is a reason, these are the reasons that are being given.
Maimuna, the first coup in Nigeria is the same reasons they gave when they took over power. Go and read what they said. The second coup in Nigeria is the same reason. Most of the coups are the same reasons. Neglect, economic deprivation, poverty, corruption. That's what I'm saying. It's the same thing. And when these leaders take over power, they repeat the same thing. Another one will take over power, they repeat the same thing. So that's what I'm saying. That we need to address this thing. We need to advance this conversation as leaders in Africa, to advance this conversation to a level where we sit experts down. How we can be able to address this particular challenge from the root is all that matters to us right now. Because if we are not careful, if this thing continues, no matter what we do, we'll still keep going round in the same circle. So I strongly believe that we need to advance these conversations to ensure that we drive the system to a point where we address that leadership question. Look, Maimuna, if we don't elect the right leaders into power, if we don't bring those people who are competent, who merit those positions, we'll keep having the same problem over and over again. And that is why we talk of electoral reforms. That is why we talk of electoral reforms. Because the electoral reforms are supposed to be such that they bring in some criterias into leadership. It's not just age, not just degree. No, it should be beyond age and degrees. It should have fundamental criterias of character, of discipline, over time, of track record of outstanding accomplishments. Because if we don't put these criterias as necessary criterias for leadership recruitment or leadership selection, for political parties to abide by, we'll keep voting people who have money and don't have the competence to address this issue.
So, Prof, when we're having these conversations, trust me, we cannot, let the ECOWAS out of it.
Of course.
part of the conversation. Yes. And then we have seen that, after the schools, the sanctions from the ECOWAS and the African Union as well often end up hurting citizens more than, the leaders themselves. We can give, a whole lot of examples which I know you are aware of. We can see the one in Mali, in Burkina Faso. We don't have to go all through all of that. Now, do these sanctions by the ECOWAS genuinely discourage future coups, or do they simply create more resentment amongst citizens, and also make these military leaders still be rebellious at the end of the day?
I will answer this question in this regard. These sanctions might not be effective, and I'll tell you the reason why. The AU and the ECOWAS have almost similar functions. Protection of democracy, advancing economic integration, and trade facilitation, and so on and so forth. These two institutions have both legislative and judicial arm, but they don't have an executive arm. So for any charter to be implemented, there must be what we call elite consensus of state representation. So if, for instance, the AU or ECOWAS needs to take a decision with regards military coup in a country, there needs to be an elite consensus on that response before ECOWAS sanctions can be implemented. Just like yesterday, they said they are going to push ECOWAS troops to Benin. If there's no elite consensus on state actors, that can be possible. And for that to be possible, that elite consensus must be consistent with the people's with the people's needs, with the people's concern. If it's not consistent with what the people want, then it becomes a problem. Because you can decide that this is elite consensus, but you have countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, where the population is supporting the coup. How can those decisions in AU and ECOWAS be implemented? How can they be implemented when the decisions of ECOWAS, the elite consensus, is not consistent with what the people want? So that's the challenge, Maimuna. That's the challenge. And that is the reason why these regional bodies have almost been decimated with regards issue of decision making. But
then why have that body if the body cannot be able to, oversee and regulate these African countries? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like we're going back and forth.
The reason why is very simple, because these same organizations have representations of countries, of leaders in those countries that are performing poorly in their countries. They are performing poorly in their countries. So they don't even have the moral legitimacy to respond. They don't have the moral legitimacy to respond. And they are also afraid that if we take this decision on this country and do this and this, what if it happens to me? So the country representative in AU or ECOWAS will have to consult with his leader at home to say, should we vote for this particular issue? Because he will be afraid. What if it happens to him? So the issue still borders on good governance domestically within those countries. Do you get what I'm trying to? Absolutely. So that is the issue. I'm not telling you that there are no externalities with regards to this coup. These coups have reasons.
They do.
They have causes, right? It is basically three. Number one, problems inherent in those countries. That has to do with corruption, bad governance, poor infrastructures, economic deprivation, and so on and so forth. Then we have problems that are influenced by externalities because of the pressure on rare earth materials, especially in Africa, where they scramble on those rare earth materials for development, either coltan or cobalt or phosphate for agriculture or uranium for nuclear power or so on and so forth. So this particular issue can also cause those coups, because if the leaders in those countries are taking decisions that are not consistent with what those superpowers want, they will cause problem in those countries. So one of the solutions of this problem is to ensure that leaders within those countries, leaders within African countries, re-strategize on how decisions are being taken within their countries. So that whatever decisions they take within those countries will not be a threat to the national security interest of the developed world.
I mean, I always say it that each time there's an issue like this, it always falls back to the ordinary citizens at the end of the day. But then let's look at the consequences of this course on democracy, which is what we're trying to see, and see how we can be able to, get somewhat of a solution on how to, mend all of this. What really are the short-term and long-term consequences of repeated coups in Africa?
Well, coups usually hampers on the psyche of the people.
Okay.
Because whether you like it or not, there's no press freedom. And, one of the criteria for advancing democracy is expression. So expression is being curtailed. And citizens' participation in the process of decision making is also a concern. Because a group of people will be taking decisions for you. They don't need your contributions. In a pluralistic world where ideas, pragmatism is supposed to lead in decision making, where varieties of ideas are important, where will that be? So whether we like it or not, when it has to do with advancement of countries or advancement of nations, you need varieties of ideas. And you can't get it in military rule. And that will stiffen the level of development for any country that is under those rules. So these are issues, very, very fundamental issues that we must look at in terms of this matter. And whether or not they are addressing those problems, whether or not they are addressing the issue is also another question.
Another issue. Because
the truth about it is that, I've told you before, history is there's precedence on this. This is not just happening now. From 1958, after revolutionaries took over countries as presidents or whatever, we now started having coups from the 60s to the 80s but those coups, what have they done to the countries? Nothing.
Absolutely. All right, let's discuss the solutions and, looking at the future outcome. Let's brainstorm on strategies. Really, what strategies can African nations adopt to prevent coups and strengthen a democratic institution? That is, if we really want to strengthen our democratic system. Because, like you've rightly explained, when the military take over, it's a whole strain on the country. There's limitation of freedom, investors pull out, a whole lot, would go on. So strategically, what should precedents of African countries, even we here in Nigeria, what should we do differently just to avoid this coup to keep on happening?
I would suggest that in a situation where we are supposed to look forward, we need a hybrid strategy, hybrid development strategy in Africa.
What do you mean by that?
A hybrid development strategy that encompasses politics, economy, and security.
Okay.
And this hybrid strategy needs to go concurrently. You can't say, wait, we won't develop until we secure. If you secure, you don't develop, what happens to the population increase and the economic growth? So we need a hybrid strategy that will go with the economy, politics, and security. And I'll explain.
Okay.
Politically, in African nations, we must begin to accentuate value-driven, productive characters in government. We must ensure that we make laws that will guarantee the right people to be in leadership positions. Because whether you like it or not, the people in leadership positions are the ones that advance the development of nations. You can't grow beyond the vision of your leaders. It's not possible. So when you have people who don't have vision, people who lack track record of accomplishment, of outstanding accomplishment in systems, you can't dream you don't dream development. It's not rocket science. People drive development. Competent people drive development. Outstanding people drive development. If you go to Singapore, their principle of meritocracy is a part of their constitution. You cannot be appointed or elected or be nominated in any political party in Singapore except you have those criteria. And then they have a system called psychobiographic analysis, where they go through your childhood history to see how you have grown, the decisions you have taken, whether you are this. Is it true you have integrity? We have to institute that in Nigeria. Over time, if we have to change the system in Africa.
No, don't you think that would be a very difficult task, especially in Africa?
See, it's a very, look, to be honest with you, it's a long-term plan. It's difficult, but nations have done it. Nations have done it, and it has worked. Because if we do not bring the right people into the system, then we have fundamental problems. The problem of Africa is not education. It's not. For instance, Nigeria has the largest number of professors in Africa.
Absolutely.
We have about 12,000 professors in Africa, 80,000 doctors in Nigeria, 80,000 doctors in Nigeria, PhD holders. But has that translated in anything? So it's not just education. It is a type of exposure, a type of enlightenment that the young population or the population of Nigeria need to have over time that would lead to development that is required. We need to make sure that is done politically in Nigeria. Now, if we are talking of quick fixes, since this one is a long-term strategy, if we're talking of quick fixes politically, we must be able to demand for credibility from our leaders. We must be able to come all out and decide to vote leaders that will work. Nigerians can do that. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Some people say it's not possible to vote in an outstanding leader in Nigeria, but it's not true. Because the last election showed that Nigerians can take a decision. Nigerians can actually make that change that we require. Peter Obi came out. He wasn't in control of states. He didn't have any governor, no senator, no House of Rep member, for instance. But at that time, many Nigerians had that, perception that he was the person who was credible enough to take the country to the next level. What happened, Maimuna? People came all out to vote. Even the president lost his own state. So who said that it cannot happen? Citizens should not be tired because they were discouraged about the outcome. Some of them have broken their voters' card. Some of them have vowed that they are not going to vote again. Yeah. If you do that, what happens to your own children? If you take that decision, what happens to your own children? What happens to the future generation? So we must decide as citizens that we will not give up to go after leaders we believe can create a change in our system. Thirdly, we must advance our economy. The greatest challenge of the African continent is transitioning our economy from a pyramid structure, where it's sharp, triangle structure, and down, to a diamond structure. The pyramid structure is such that you have few rich people up, a triangle, and many poor people. There's no middle class.
Absolutely.
So the challenge of the African continent from independence of most of those countries is how to transition the economy to a diamond structure that have a middle class. If you look at it in Nigeria now, middle class is virtually, yes. So we need to advance policies, both monetary policy and fiscal policies, that will engender the middle class immediately, because this youth population is jobless and they are skillful because it is a population that is filled with knowledge. They are not like the last 40 years kind of youths. These are youths who are exposed. They are youths who are knowledgeable. They are youths who are educated. And once you allow this population of people not to engage, you're having a very serious problem. So we need to transition that by ensuring that our primary and secondary economy is developed. What do I mean? Production, primary, then construction, industry, manufacturing industry are being advanced. We need policies that will drive this process so that we create industries and companies that can be able to employ people so that people can work. If we do not do that immediately, then it becomes a very, very serious problem for us to advance that. I told you it's a hybrid strategy that has to do with politics, economy, and security. We have a big security problem in Africa. Our countries has been run off by terrorists. What do we do? COVID-19 that slowed global development, advanced the movement of these terrorists into borders without unhindered. And that is one of the greatest challenge that COVID caused. So what do we do to stem this tide? What do we do security-wise? We need to start rethinking how to protect our borders. Because our borders are porous. Nigeria has 1,878 legal entrance points into the country. But out of this 1,989, but 1,878 is unmanned. 1,989 legal entry points, 1,878 is unmanned. Only 84 is manned. And out of that 84, some, if you go, you'll see only drum and stick there. How do you advance your security of your country with borders that are porous like that? When developed countries are talking of immigration, America is talking of immigration, Europe is talking of immigration, illegal immigration, whatever. These are the basic causes of insecurity of the 21st century. And we are not advancing those discussions. So General Christopher did what was right. He gave a suggestion. How do we protect our borders? We need to start talking of, we need to put our border protection security, especially building walls on our borders. And he said it is something that is doable. America is building a wall between them and Mexico. I mean, Pakistan and India, Pakistan and Afghanistan have a wall. That solved their security problem. About 1,390 something kilometers. So we can do that. Saudi Arabia also has a wall between them and Iraq. So we can think of that, because when a wall is built, technology is being put. Anybody who crosses those walls, the technology would respond. You will know people who cross. We need another agency responsible for border security. Maybe border rangers or border whatever. We need, that is very crucial and very fundamental with regards to that. And you can see Nigeria, it's not as if Nigeria is not capable. Nigeria, before you know it, went to Benin with a fighter jet, moving around Benin with fighter jet to prove some certain level of, dominance within that.
I was going to ask you the involvement of that, but I just got a signal that our time is up.
Okay.
But maybe we'll have that conversation behind cameras. Thank you so much, Professor Nuhu Abubakar Atta, for joining us this morning and for unpacking this particular issue. And then we really hope that the government is hearing. It's one thing to talk about these issues, but when the people in the right positions are not there listening to the people, it's a problem for them to be able to come together and look for a better resolution in solving this problem. But at the end of the day, we hope that everything turns out well in Africa generally. Thank you once again.